Hey guys, I'm Bassmaster Elite Series Pro Pat Schlapper with BassResource.com. I'm going to talk about structure fishing in the springtime and kind of how I approach finding fish. So in the springtime, it's all about the spawn and the migration route that them fish are going to take from the main lake or wherever they're wintering at as they move up to spawn. So the first thing I do is I'll look at a map and I'll look for a likely place where those fish might spawn. It could be the back of a cove, it could be a marina, anything that's protected where it has the habitat for them to spawn. So what I look for are secondary, primary points leading back into that pocket. And once I find those points, I want to find the structure that they're most likely to hold on. And structure fishing is kind of a loose term. It could mean a rock pile, it could mean a single rock, it could mean, to me, a clump of grass on a flat, it could mean a tree, a log. So every lake and system is a little bit different. So the key thing is learning where they spawn and how they migrate in there, and from there you'll figure out what type of structure they're going to use as they move up. So some key baits that I'll use when I'm looking for that, especially in the spring, pre-spawn, it's going to be a jerk bait, something that I can cover water with, but depending upon how early on it is, sometimes those fish are real lethargic, and that jerk bait, it has a lot of draw power, and you can work it erratically, you can work it real slow, you can use a long pause, and you can use that bait to get a fish to come out of the brush pile, get a fish to come up out of the rocks. It's just super, super effective all year, but especially in the springtime. As far as a setup, I use the St. Croix Legend Tournament 6-foot 8-inch medium power, and it's an extra fast, and it's actually called the jerk bait rod now. And I've used 3 or 4 different generations of this rod. I've used a lot of different types of rods for jerk baits. This is by far the best one that I've found. It's a short enough length where you can work the bait properly. It's got a soft tip, but enough backbone where when you hang a big fish, you do have the power to fight them properly. I typically will run 10 to 12 pound Sunline FC Sniper and fluorocarbon, and then I'll use a 7:1 gear ratio reel. So that's kind of an absolute staple for me in the springtime. Like, you will not find me on any body of water, whether I'm in Florida or Wisconsin. I'll have probably 3 jerk baits out in the spring. The other big player is going to be a lipless bait, a rattle trap, whatever you want to call it. Usually a 1/2 ounce, once again, depending upon the depth and what kind of structure I'm fishing, 1/2 or 3/4, typically a 1/2. Another bait that is versatile, you can burn it, you can rip it out of grass, you can yo-yo it, which is something that I think is not talked about real often. It's kind of one of those techniques that it takes a little while to learn how to do it, but it's really, really effective in the pre-spawn period. So you can cover a flat with it, like I said, rip it out of grass, super versatile. You get a lot of reaction bites with a lipless bait. So on that setup, I use a St. Croix Victory 7-foot 3-inch medium heavy power, and it's a fast action. I like a little longer rod just for the pure distance. A lot of times if I'm on a long point, or there's a longer, bigger rock pile, I want to be able to cover that thing with a long cast. I'll typically use 14 to 16 pound fluorocarbon. I usually use the FC Sniper from Sunline, and then I'll use a 7:1 gear ratio reel. In this rod, it's a little more parabolic than a lot of rods, in that medium heavy fast category, which I think is really key with any treble hook bait, but especially with a rattle trap, because they're kind of known for losing fish. So there's kind of a fine line between using too soft of a rod and too stiff of a rod. And like a glass rod is great for fighting the fish sometimes, but when you're trying to rip that thing out of grass or yo-yo it, it's not as effective. So to me, this Victory the 7.3 medium heavy fast, that's the perfect in-between rod that kind of has all of the attributes that I'm looking for. So from there, one other key bait that I'll use to try and locate the fish is going to be a bladed jig or a swim jig, but either one of those is something that you'll really want to use in the spring, around structure. It's catches big fish, you can cover water with it. Once again, you can burn it, you can yo-yo it, you can crawl it along the bottom. It's a staple. It's really a staple all year, but in the spring is when it really shines. I'll throw on a glass rod, and that's kind of a preference thing. I've experimented with a lot of rods. There's a lot of other rods that do work well. This is a St. Croix Legend Glass 7.2, heavy power, moderate action. And the moderate action is really key. You want something parabolic. When that fish comes, most time they'll come up behind that bait, and a lot of times it won't be like a real shocking bite. All of a sudden you'll feel that blade just kind of stop vibrating, and that fish, most time they'll come up from behind it and just kind of push it forward. And you'll wind down and you want that rod to just load up, and then you sweep into it. So I mean, it's actually their chatterbait rod. They make it in the Mojo glass too. For me, it's what I really prefer for a bladed jig. So that's another one, another technique that I use in the spring. And then the last one, and this is kind of, it's a Carolina rig, and the other baits are more, in the water column, not necessarily on the bottom. But those baits are really effective for finding where those groups of fish may be staged up. Say it is, a long point, and you find them on that isolated structure. Maybe it's a rock pile the size of your boat. You found them with that jerk bait, and you catch a couple of them, but then they kind of get used to it. That's when I'll pick up something and drag it. I like to throw a Carolina rig a lot. I mean, you can do it with a Texas rig, a football jig. There's several different things, you can drag along the bottom. But myself, I feel like a Carolina rig, in a lot of cases, it's a little more finessey with the way that bait kind of drifts behind the, the weight. And I just feel like I get bigger bites on it a lot of time. So this is a 1/2 ounce sinker. I'll use a 1/2 and a 3/4 the majority of the time, obviously depending on the depth, depending upon how windy it is. The key with a Carolina rig is you want to keep bottom contact. It's not something you're winding up. It's just you're dragging the bottom, and you're kind of feeling it go through the rocks, go through the gravel, go through the edge of the grass, come over the brush pile. It's all about bottom contact and feel. So, and actually on the 1/2 ounce, I use that same rod I do with a rattle trap. It's the 7.3 medium heavy power fast action. Because I like the length, and with a Carolina rig, I like it a little more of a parabolic bend. I don't want a broomstick. I want when that bite, you get that bite a lot of times, it's just kind of spongy. You'll be dragging and you'll be like, oh, I kind of feel like I got some grass on there. And then all of a sudden you'll feel a little pull, and you'll reel down, and you just want that rod to load up and sweep your rod. You don't want to do a big snap hook set, because a lot of times what'll happen, if you slackline it, is you'll pop that weight up, and you'll lose contact with the hook. So you'll feel it kind of free, and then oh, I got them, and then they'll come off. You really want to sweep that rod and let it load up when you hook them. So Carolina rig is kind of, once you locate the fish, that's what I prefer to drag around. Once again, you can use several different things, to catch them, but Carolina rig is what I prefer to catch them on when I find them.